to keep a whole bunch of carnal people in a religious building. Instead of just going in and saying, this is what I'm doing. I am called first of all to the people of God. As much as I want lost souls won, I am not going to win lost souls at the expense of God's people. And to break God's law in order to win lost souls never works. It's like a young girl who says, I'm going to date a lost man in order to bring him into the kingdom. Doesn't work. Paul did everything for the sake of the elect. Folks, just listen to me for a second. Shouldn't there be somewhere where a Christian can go that is a safe haven? And isn't that supposed to be the fellowship of the saints? But it's not. When warfare is going on inside what's called the church, that's not a safe haven. A dear friend of mine recently left a church, and one of the leaders came to him and said, but brother, the Bible always talks about adversity and this and that. You shouldn't leave because of this. And he says, brother, the adversity is supposed to come from the unbelievers, not from the leadership. Because you want to do something in the Bible that they say you just shouldn't do nowadays. All things for the sake of the elect. Can you imagine? I always use this illustration. But let's say my wife's at Walmart at 11 o'clock one night, has to pick up something, and she goes out in the parking lot and two men grab her, throw her in the car to abuse her. And you walk by and you see it. But because you're afraid that they're going to do something to you, you let my wife be just tore apart by those beasts. I am going to want to bring those beasts to justice, but I'm going to look for you. And it'll take the grace of God for me not to tear you apart limb from limb. That's my bride. I don't care if you lose your life. You are required to jump into the middle of that and do whatever you have to do. They're going to have to kill you before you are going to stop trying to defend her. That is the same way, and that's the word that pastors need to hear all over this country. Catering to a bunch of lost people to have a big church. But some of these people are sincere. They just don't understand theology. They don't even know what a saved person looks like, let alone the church. And this is probably, I guess, the biggest thing that burns me up. The bride. The bride, yes.
I just wonder if another facet of that is not so much being called out, but being called in. First of all, and if as you said, one of the major purposes and reasons for the church is the building up of the body, the equipping of saints, all those other things that come into play. The question is, when people are being called out or called in, but there's difficulty reasons why they may not be able to go to where they know there's a big church. At what point do they make the decision either to cut everything off and go to someplace they know where the godly man's preaching is a solid group of believers, or begin to plant the root?
You know, that again goes back to the same question that Kyle had. When do you know, look, I'm going to move my entire family, or I'm just going to start a church? And that can only come about through a lifestyle of renewing yourself in the Word of God and being mature and the Lord leading you. I can't necessarily set down, 5 principles that if this happens, you should go to another church, and 5 principles if this happens, you should start one. But we have to be men and women who are renewed in our mind, and God will lead us. But we see that happening all over America right now. People are fed up, and they're either going to a church that preaches the gospel, even if they have to move their family across the country, or they're starting churches. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Another thing I think that we need to come to grips with is I do not believe that just because a group of people get together one day a week, it's necessarily a church. Okay? Now, that's how churches can begin. But a lot of missionary agencies have really redefined church for, you get a group of 5 people together, you've started a church. No, you've got a group of 5 people together. I think we need to look at what a mature church is and call that a church. But at the same time, I want you to think about something. People think, man, how can I start a church? I mean, there's all these complexities. There's the building, there's this, there's that, there's all these different things. Do you realize how many things that we put upon ourselves to call it a church that are not necessary? There are real churches. There are real Baptist churches right now in the mountains of Peru, and they don't have a building, and they don't have a full-time preacher who is paid by the congregation, but it is a church. It was founded by another church. People were sent out from there. They meet together. They have leadership. They support the saints. They do. Just don't think that, a guy, I was speaking with a guy a few months ago, and he goes, I just think, we need to plant a church. I said, brother, you've got a church. He goes, well, we don't have a building. We don't have this. We don't have that. I said, look what you have. You have a group of people. They're meeting. You have a defined leadership that is growing and maturing. You're giving to the needs of the saints. You're standing in relationship with other churches of like faith. I mean, what do you need? See, all these complexities that we think it makes it almost impossible to have church. And there's not that many. There's not that many. It's much harder to start a church than you think, and it's not as hard to start a church as you think. Don't think you have to start building and lights and all these different things. Now, I believe that in a perfect case scenario, and the way that we do things is, I believe that there are churches in America. And I believe that it is very good, young men, that you need to be a part of a real church. And that you need to grow up under the tutelage of real pastors. And that real pastors and a real congregation ought to lay their hands upon you and send you out to start a real church and to help you start that church. So I can't recommend a bunch of freelancers just running around starting groups everywhere. But we're living in glorious times. Great times. I mean, this is the stuff they write history books about. This is fantastic. So study hard. Submit yourself to godly leadership even when they're not, sometimes you think, as godly as you are. Grow. And go out there and be used of God. Another question? Yes.
If you come into a church, how do you start to implement church discipline and clean up the membership roll? Or if you come in and that's just formed everything?
Okay, you come into a church as a new pastor, and how do you implement church discipline and clean up the membership rolls? Bless God, do it on the first day and blow that thing to pieces. No, I'm just kidding. First of all, I think that there is room for thinking about reformation in existing churches. But here's something I want you to look at. First of all, ask yourself, is it a church? Don't assume because it says First Baptist, Second Baptist, Church of the Living Waters, just because it has a brick building, just because it has a nicely mowed lawn, just because it has deacons, and just because people go there on Sunday, do not assume that it's church. Okay? Has the candlestick been removed? You see, people don't talk like that anymore, do they? People don't talk that way anymore. Is there a body of people in that group that are truly regenerate? You know, an old man told me one time it's easier to give birth than it is to raise the dead. So we shouldn't always be thinking about going out and taking over a church and reforming it. We may ought to think more about going out and planting a church.